Okay, we press on. We're going to be done sooner than later. We're going to go through the 5 pillars of Islam real quick. I think you know a lot of these, but it never hurts to kind of talk about them, I think. The 5 pillars of Islam. The Prophet's last address was at Arafat, just before his death in 632. It sums up the essence of Islam. It identifies the 5 pillars upon which Islamic belief and practice rest. 1, worship your God and sustainer. There's that central theme. Perform your 5 daily salat or prayers. Fast your month of Ramadan. Make your pilgrimage to your house. In other words, the Kaaba in Mecca. And then pay the zakat on your property willingly and obey whatever I command you. And then you will enter the paradise of your Lord and sustainer. So let's go through these one by one quickly. Pillar 1, testimony of one God. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. If you want to become a Muslim, that's all you need to say. Please don't say that tonight. And just because I said it doesn't mean I meant it, okay? But really, it's a very simple entrance rite. As I understand it, you can become a Muslim by praying that prayer. Or saying that it's a statement of doctrine. Really, it's a statement of belief. Now, what's interesting in today's world, though, is the way that that is getting co-opted, I think, especially by radical fundamental Islam. Who are the true Muslims? Who are the true believers? That's not enough for them, in my mind. There are certain other qualifications. There are certainly a lot of Muslims in a lot of part of the world that haven't been following Sharia law, that haven't been living according to the way that God intended. And so they're not the true Muslims. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in weeks to come. I think that same conversation is happening in the United States sometimes with Christianity. Who are the true believers? Who are the ones that really believe the Bible? Well, the ones that interpret it in a certain way. Usually it's the way that I think. You know how that goes. But that issue is going on, that debate is going on in a fierce way in Islam. And I think the terrorists have co-opted that struggle, that question, because everybody's afraid to speak up and claim to be a true Muslim for fear of offending some of the radical fundamentalists. Testimony of one God, he is Allah, the one and only, Allah the eternal, absolute. He begetteth not, nor is he begotten. There is not like unto him. Sounds a little bit like the Nicene Creed almost. With these words, Islam puts itself in irreconcilable opposition to all faiths that believe in many gods, and to Christianity, which holds that Jesus is the Son of God. We're just not going to get together about this issue. In fact, we wonder sometimes why they hate us. Well, sometimes it might be Western colonialism and expansion and perhaps decadence, but sometimes it's just the fact that we have more than one God in their mind. And when that's the central tenet of your faith, then you can't stand that, I think. So I think that's at the heart of some of their ill will towards us. And I'm using that in parentheses because they is quite diverse. Islam means self-surrender and service, submission. The promise is given that through submission to Allah, people will find their appropriate place and achieve peace. Salam. Pillar 2, self-surrender in prayer. You can read a little bit more about that. Of course, they pray 5 times daily. And if they can't carry out a prayer at a specific time, they can make it up later. It seems like we've all been around people at work or schools where there's been a prayer room that's been set aside for people to be able to pray at a certain time. They can make it up later, but I think we've made accommodations in our culture. I think in general that's a good thing, but I think the flip side of that is sometimes we can be bothered by that, can't we? What about Christianity? What about our opportunity? So we can kind of go back and forth about those kind of things from time to time. We won't solve that here, but I know we struggle with it as a culture. Here's some of the order of prayer, the niyyah, the intention to pray. That oftentimes happens with a ceremonial washing and a purifying before they come. The oyam, or standing, remembering the greatness of God, taking refuge in him. Show us the straight way, they're saying to God. And they're kneeling, the ruku, paying homage to God in great humility. Allahu Akbar, they'll say, God is great. Now those words get said a lot. at various times, but they certainly get said in prayer. Allahu Akbar. The sijud, or falling prostrate, we've seen that, where they'll be down, they touch the ground with their forehead. It's really quite remarkable to see a Muslim praying in that kind of submission. It's certainly at the essence of their prayer time, the essence of their submission before God. And then the Atashahud, I didn't pronounce that right, the recitation, you do that while sitting up. It's a confession of faith. And then the Taslim, the greeting of peace that they share, oftentimes turning to the people around him, much like we might do on a Sunday morning, and sharing the peace of the Lord. So that's kind of how that works. I've heard at times, I've read that it can take about 5 minutes for each of these. That's a half an hour, folks. That's a long time. I think some people talk faster, so it goes faster. Some people talk slower, and it goes slower. A lot of repetition built into that. Lots of words of Scripture, the Koran, built into that. The most important, pillar 3, fasting. The most important sign of religious faithfulness, aside from daily prayer, is daytime fasting during the month of Ramadan. Whoever fasts during the month of Ramadan with a sense of faith and responsibility will be forgiven for past sins by God. Supposedly, if you do a duty performed during Ramadan, it's worth 70 times what it is during the other times of the year. So that's pretty cool. I think Ramadan feels a lot like Lent. It's a time of penitence and forgiveness, helping the poor. It feels a lot like Lent does for us, except that we don't have to fast all day long. Now, when is Ramadan? When does it take place? Do you know? The fall. 11 days earlier every year. That's how it happens. It falls 11 days earlier every year. So right now it's in the middle of the summer, which is a long time to fast when your days are 16 hours long. It'd be nice to have Ramadan in the middle of December, right, or January, when it's a nice short day. I remember this because it was in the paper last year when there was a Minnesota Vikings receiver. His name was Hussein Abdullah. Remember that? Did you read about that in the paper? Yeah. And he had to go to training camp in July in Mankato and find a way to get enough fluids and not dehydrate when he couldn't drink anything. He made the team, I was told. I didn't know that, but somebody told me that this morning. Made the team and was able to observe Ramadan at the same time, but certainly not easy. The end of the fast is commemorated in the communal celebration of Eid. Is that how that's pronounced? Eid? Eid? And it's certainly a little bit like Easter and Christmas all rolled together. It's a great time of family and gift-giving and celebration. It's interesting. Saddam Hussein was hanged on the day of Eid. Not good timing. You know, if you read that one article, it talks a little bit about that. And it talks about how he died with dignity. And so much of the Muslim world, I think, was on our side when it came to Saddam. But then when it came to hanging him, you know, the world of Islam has been struggling so much with humiliation. And then you see a man like Saddam suddenly standing proudly when he dies and facing the people that are tormenting him. And of course this is all broadcast on the internet and everybody can see it and watch it. And so suddenly this humiliated man has a moment of pride almost. And then we kill him on a day when it's their holiest day of celebration. And then he becomes a martyr. He becomes a martyr. You know, we kind of got that one wrong. And I don't know how much that was our decision, the U.S. troops. And we weren't the ones necessarily mocking him, but that all kind of came together, and the tide can shift so quickly sometimes when it comes to how we handle and how we work in the midst of a different culture and tradition that we don't always understand. Pillar number 4, the giving of alms. Paul had mentioned that earlier. Alms are meant to be given regularly and in times of emergency. You can read about that further. But something that I think is largely a requirement. It's interesting because there's not nearly the separation of church and state in the world of Islam. It's sometimes hard to tell the difference between alms and taxes. conceivably, in a world where Islam is truly being practiced in a society where that's happening, there should be no unjust conditions from people. But the same is probably true of Christianity. So what's true in principle doesn't necessarily always work in practice. But I think these alms are meant to be requirements and be paid out and shared, not just for the poor and unfortunate, but I think they're also intended for those people that convert to Islam and might have to suffer economic consequences because of it. You know, you're in another land, or you're in a situation where suddenly your life is very awkward, if not downright punished because of the decision you've made. So there's money set aside to help people like that as well. And then finally, there's the pilgrimage, the Hajj, 2 months after Ramadan, and the pictures in the back. One of the great, of course, events of a lifetime. It used to be, and still is, I'm sure, for a lot of people, that they save up for years and years and years to be able to do this and to go on this pilgrimage. Some people do it more than once, but certainly the trip of a lifetime. I don't have the time, we've run out of time, but it's kind of interesting to read about the things that they do during this 7th-day experience in Mecca, but walking around the Kaaba 7 times, kissing the black stone that's there, and everything else connected. They drink from the water, the Zamzam well, which is where Hagar was believed to have found water for her and her son Ishmael when they were out in the wilderness, and just lots of things like that. But it's very much about renewing their relationship with God and living out of the fullness of that relationship and the promise of eternal life. Okay, is this too much information, about the right amount, too fast? Tell me a little bit. About right? There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff for you to read. I encourage you to do some homework. If you find interesting books, we might put together a list of interesting resources for people. If there's interesting articles, maybe we can copy them for other people to read. So don't be afraid to share resources with me. We will learn this together. We'll grow together. We certainly have time for questions along the way, but there's also kind of a tension between wanting to cover basic information and have a lot of that down too. We'll certainly get more into the modern world as we go along, but I think it's just important we know some of these basics too, so we know what we're talking about when we get to some of the things. Okay? Just a couple of housekeeping things. Classes, you'll figure this out already probably, but they'll generally be about an hour and a half long. You can come in the morning or night. It's the same session. If you can't come, you can get the study guide online. It's probably available now or the next day. We'll also be taping all the sessions, so if you have to miss and you want to watch them on tape, go to the church website. It says there on the front where that is, and you can watch online and keep up that way as well. If you are able to give a donation, there's some baskets, $5 to $7 for copies or something. We'll certainly take your money on that. There's a lot of paper we'll use for this to kind of share these resources. Anything else that you have? Thank you for being a part of this. This is important stuff in our world today. So thank you for being on the journey and for learning together. Go in peace. Create a place for all to belong.